What inspired you to write this novel? Was there an inciting incident or something that you came across in the news?
Hi, thank you for asking me, I'm happy to talk about what made me write this book. So, I started writing this in 2020, or at least the seed of the idea was around that time. And at the time, when I started writing, we didn't have this kind of even AI technology that completely runs haywire. But for me, the problem at that time, or the basic idea at the time, was about women share intimate pictures, men share intimate pictures, but what women share becomes a kind of revenge porn, and they pay a huge price for that. And I read a lot of incidents happening in Tamil Nadu at the time, where I'm from, where this cost women heavily. There was a lot of shaming, there was doxing, there was blackmail, there was concerted, almost gang activity that became like an entire web that was like with no escape. And then I thought, we have to write about this because this is going to affect, and I could really feel that happening, that it's going to affect a lot of young women, and it's going to affect a lot of people who will have no control. Like once something leaves your phone, you have no control, but you also have no control because people could take any picture and say that was yours. And so I think that's where the idea was born. But obviously, into the future, and as I kept writing, like every single technological advancement that happened proved my hunch right. And it's almost like, in that sense, very prescient for me to have picked up this topic.
The book is very explicit and cutting, taking aim at various institutions. Did you face any issues with censorship, or did you have to be careful with what you said or how you said things?
So actually, part of what I try to do with this book is to try to make people realize that there are two levels of this online hate. So one is this personalized hate, like someone doesn't like you, and then they go after you, and then all these things happen. But I think that the hate that we do not see, the hate that is not addressed, is this very organized, almost like a syndicate type of hate that are run by people on payrolls, people who follow toolkits, people who are actually recruited for this purpose. Like there are different type of IT cells that are doing this. And so I wanted to also lay bare this almost corporate structure that lies behind this hate against women, and especially very politically outspoken women, and the price they pay online for that. And does this mean that I have to name the offenders? I think yes. Will it get me into trouble? I think one of the ways in which I thought I could get some breathing space was to have this book released in the UK first, and then I think it only got released in India like yesterday. So to get a little bit of a buffer so that the book couldn't be shut down, that it was actually read. And I also think that it's not just about the home ground or where India, where the problem is, because I think that the problem is big tech itself. I just think that big tech, for all the investments, for all the amount of money that they managed to get in investments, they have really not addressed the issue of women's safety. And it's just like they could do it like in the blink of an eye if they really cared about it, and they haven't done it. And I think that is like a really big danger for all of us.
The length of the chapters vary from tweets to Reddit or blog posts. Was this an attempt to replicate a doom scroll? How does the content of your work inform its structure and form?
Thanks for that. That's a really insightful question. So I knew this. I was writing this really online digital novel because I think that writers have to be of their time, and at the same time you also have to work your own structure, your own format or a form of narrating the story, because obviously the digital is very different to, let's say, a Victorian novel or a historical novel, because what happens here is very accelerated. Like you no longer live in, let's say, the time of letter correspondence or even email correspondence, because things here like just literally blow up, like completely hashtags surface, they become trending. And one of the thing was, how do you keep the pace of the book? Like, how do you keep this happening at this breakneck speed? And also, how do you best capture in words, or in writing, or in the aspect of reading, what is essentially a much more visual phenomena, because so much is around videos and very short interactions. So I think the chapters kind of, as you said, mimic the doom scrolling effect, but also mimic like the 30-second video, like it mimics our dying attention span. And part of the pushback against attention spans is that the only content that gets what you call the stickiness is stuff that is rage bait. And so here we enter a world where everyone is provoking the other with the most rage bait possible, and it leads into, it's almost like an object that's set in motion, doesn't come to an end, until an external force acts on it. But here every external force that's acting on it actually accelerates it and makes it go faster and faster. So there's like no inertia, and even efforts at inertia actually propel them into greater action, because if you're quiet on the internet when you're being shamed, it just adds more to it. So it's the inescapability of online hate and online lynch mobs. And I think that it was as you say very rightly about the content deciding the format.
Both When I Hit You and The Orders Were to Rape You use transgressions of the body as a major theme. In Fieldwork as a sex object, this violation is transmuted into a virtual space or body. What draws you to this theme?
When I was writing When I Hit You, part of the challenge that I faced was to make sure that you had to depict violence, but you could not reduce violence only to the physical. So there were two interesting things. One was how to write about violence in a way in which men who are actually abusive, men who are actually do not relish this. What if they should not read this book and they should not think, yay, they should not think, wow, that woman's being hit and I'm getting a high out of it. And it's not a very easy thing, because you have to portray the violence at the same time, make sure that the abusive person doesn't get the upper hand. They do not, in so many words, get off on it. And so you had to write about it, depict it in no way without demeaning the women, even though the purpose of the violence was to demean the women. And so writing has to, almost kind of dance around it and make it a really shameful act to be violent. And the second type of violence is the hidden psychological violence, which is almost like a game of chess, or it's like it's actually very corrosive, and you cannot show bruises, you cannot show what is happening, and that. So When I Hit You actually was a challenge in that way for me as a writer. And I think that The Orders Were to Rape You, these were women who wanted to talk about the violence that happened to them. These were women who wanted to allow their testimony to bring people to justice. And these were women who were being punished because they had gone through sexual violence, because nobody consents for sexual violence. Nobody consents to transgression. And so at once they were blaming, I think, two people, the people who were judging them for becoming victims, and the people who actually were the rapists and the men who put them in this. And I wanted to make sure that we not only go out there and condemn the people who are the perpetrators of the violence, which in that case was the Sri Lanka army, but also to hold a mirror to our own society and ask ourselves, like, what justice are we doing to these women? If we are shaming them, if we are judging them, and if we are not integrating them into society as one of us, and these were women who were willing to lay their lives down for us. So I think for me it was I really wanted to capture their anger, but also capture the absolute feeling of being let down. So I think those were, in a sense, different books. But I think with Fieldwork as a sex object, it's like the new frontier is the digital one. And I think that, in the olden times, and especially, alluding to what is a most biblical is the idea of stone throwing on a woman, but and it's like, here it's like it's a digital space, but you still see this kind of stone throwing on women. You still see that, like, if they are outspoken or if they are rebellious, then they're actually paying for it by being punished and being called all kinds of names. And the advancement in technology has not been used to ensure or safeguard women, but has been used to actually shame them further. And so for me, I felt that, and it's also relayed at the same time, like, even this, if this act of shaming of women was a public spectacle in a physical place, the audience is limited. But on the internet, you're talking about an infinite or almost infinite number of people who could watch it and who could relive that experience of, getting high or getting off on your shaming. And I felt that this is so bad because it's like an endless loop and a viral circle. So, I wanted to really write about that.
In the afterword, you write the lines, "This is not a book that you read, this book is reading you." I read the book as essentially being about misogyny, which is explored through a multitude of ways and seen through a 21st century internet-based lens. Is your main character, Amy, intentionally written to be a complicated person?
I think there is I don't know if it's philosophical, but there is an ethical question at the heart of the book. And the question is the inverse of what we all know is true. It's that if we liked somebody, we would go to any limits to defend their interest, to stand up for them, or ideally that's what we would do, right? Like, or we would be forgiving, which I think in the case of a lot of celebrities, like, there are things that you would judge your neighbor about, you judge your sister about. But with celebrities, we are like, oh, but I like that person. Or, you have a kind of parasocial relationship with them, which makes you more forgiving. So for me, it was the inverse of this question. So if you have parasocial relationship with, let's say, an online person who is provocative, is based on hate, and, there's so many people who are hating them, would you stand up for someone whom you don't necessarily agree with? Or would you stand up for someone who is annoying or who is triggering or who is not your type of person? And I think with Amy or Amrita in this book, it was much more the question of, you would find her an attention seeker. And it's okay. It's okay if she's an attention seeker, but when something bad happens to her, would you still stand by her side or would you just be quiet? And I think it's a question of something that we have to ask ourselves, because we cannot choose our solidarity based on whether we like people or not. We have to choose our solidarity based on whether there's been injustice done to them or not. And I think that's a very personal question for all of us.
Why did you choose to make your protagonist a Brahmin Hindi person?
I think for a couple of reasons, actually. The first was obviously, it's true that, and I would say this, it's 1,000 times true that Dalit, Shudra or oppressed Adivasi women completely lack the privilege that an Amy Chaturvedi has on an online space. Like, they would have faced a much, much, much worse reaction, and the ending would have been different. They would have been like lynched in so many more different ways, and that's a fact. And I think, but what is interesting to understand here is that even the privilege does not save these women. And I wanted to set up this juxtaposition to say that, even the most privileged woman faces this, and it is for you to understand what would happen to the majority of the country who are, let's say, oppressed, women from oppressed and marginalized backgrounds, who, if they dare to be political, if they dare to be online. And the second question is also the idea that how is it that, when you're a woman, it's so easy to slut shame you, and the fact that, you're Brahmin or you're rich and all of that becomes secondary because, they just cannot allow or take this from a woman. So, and you see this like happening routinely to women irrespective of, their backgrounds. But of course, the backlash is very different. And I also wanted this to play out to reveal, as you actually pointed out at the beginning, that this book is reading you. So you understand, like when you read this book, you understand, oh, she's privileged, but oh, shit's happening to her, like, and then you're like, she can handle it, or like the system is so entrenched that they are going to stand up and protect her. So I think it's this layers of complication that comes into the story, but also allows me and I think the reader to understand as an absolute foil what would happen if she did not have that caste privilege going for her.
One of the major issues raised in the novel is the conflict between theoretical or online versus boots on the ground activism. Why is the latter so important?
The thing with online activism, it shuts you up in so many ways as well. Like, you know, we were earlier speaking about Amy being this Brahmin woman and therefore all of this, but I remember, like, you know, in early 2012 going online and writing about, you know, the right to eat beef, or, you know, participating in a beef festival, and I think the comments were more like, you know, we gotta gang rape you and telecast it alive, like we're going to have a carbolic acid ready for acid throws. And there was like, why is no Hindu organization giving a fatwa against her? Like, you know, if she was a Muslim, that's what they did to Salman Rushdie. So there was this and it was like, so obviously so much of it was like casteist attacks, and this casteist attacks on me like continue, like, you know, like people would say that, oh, she's there to sweep the carpets, or somebody would say, oh, but I would not even rape someone with a face like hers, like, oh, and then like, oh, but she's typical South Indian, like she's Shudra, like the way they would just go after you and what they and it was like this idea of like their own in the inverse of pretty privilege, and the inverse that, you know, oh, Brahmin men would find you unrapeable. And it was like, oh my God. So the thing is, it's so easy to shut you down. It's so easy to shut you down in these spaces. I'm not saying that, you know, we shouldn't do online activism. And so on the one hand is that they would go after every single indicator of you and, you know, destroy you. But also the second thing, and this is not, the second bigger question is that, you know, how do we judge the online? We judge the online based on metrics. Like what's the, you know, the equivalent of a store footfall, right? Like how many views has this got, how many shares has this got, how many hours have people watched, like let's say this 30-second clip or the 60-second clip. So everything is metric based. But what we don't understand about metrics, and only people who work behind the scenes understand, is that metrics can be generated, that they use a lot of bots. They use a lot of accounts that are dedicated to amplifying hate. They use a lot of toolkits in which this kind of hate is sent out and propagated from various time zones and from various handles across the world, so that it becomes a trending hashtag. So this online infrastructure, the infrastructure of hate, is almost like an entire corporate model. And people don't understand, like, you know, so you are doing online activism and you think, you know, you're doing some, but the people who want to shut you down can do it in a multiple level of ways. And it's not just political organizations who are doing it, corporates are doing it. Corporates are doing, like, I don't know, like land grab are doing it. Corporates that are like doing the most toxic things to the environment are doing it. They find ways to shut you down. And so these bots, these people who do these kind of things, what, you know, has now become a kind of hatred towards Indians online is also like part of what they call the Pajitosphere or the Pajits. But these people were actually, you know, even hired by Israel, for instance, to put anti-Palestine propaganda. So the online thing is, we think that, you know, we are recruiting people, and I think it's essential, it's absolutely essential that we do this work online. But the thing is, the backlash that we get for it, and it's absolutely manufactured outrage, and it's there's an entire political economy behind it. So for me, how do we fight against it is that, you know, we have to stay online. Of course, there's no abdication of the online, but we really do have to make sure that we have the actual numbers, that we are actually people and that we are not bots, and that, you know, people to people on the ground activism that cannot be pulled down in a day, that cannot, you know, come down to this. I think that, you know, it's the old thing that, you know, you have to fight the fascist in the street. It somehow does come down to it at the end of the day.
Out of the few constant relationships in Amy's life, her relationship with her mother was the most interesting to me. It's constantly in a grey zone, encapsulating many dimensions of the mother-daughter relationship concomitantly. Would you mind discussing this dynamic and what you wanted to highlight here?
No, I have found this among Indian mothers, and possibly, let's say, broader South Asian mothers. is that on the one hand they want you to live the life that they could not lead, and I think with Amy it's a little bit of that. Like, her mother really thinks that so many opportunities were denied to her, were taken from her, that did not exist for her, and that she was shown her place, and therefore, like, it's a bit of a thwarted ambition thing, but also a lot of restrictions, and they want their daughters to go out there and get everything. On the other hand, the mother figure is also held responsible for everything that's going wrong with the daughter's life. So it's like always people are going to turn back, look at her and say, bad parenting. You raised your daughter badly. And therefore, they want to both be absolved of the crimes, and at the same time they want to be the engine of your victories and your transgressions and your successes, and every different border that you cross, every line that you step across, I think it means a lot to them. And so they are, I think, not in like, they're not either here or there. They want to do both. They don't want anything bad to come and stick on them, because I think it's from self-preservation, and at the same time they do not want you to end up like them. So it's an interesting dynamic. Yeah.
There's a character in the book called Child Soldier, an Elam Tamil living in London. This isn't the first time you've written about the Elam struggle. In The Orders Were to Rape You, you've written about your lifelong attachment to the cause. Can you tell us more about what the movement means to you?
Growing up in the 80s in Tamil Nadu, I think it was inevitable that you did not hear about it, or in some way it was not a part of your life. And especially with my parents, and which I have written at length about, they were very, very, very big supporters of the struggle, and in fact it was like seen as an almost like an aspirational thing to give yourself for the struggle, to understand this idea of martyrdom, to understand that there are things bigger than you for which you sacrifice yourself. There are things worth fighting for, and the things worth fighting for were not about individual achievements. It was not about becoming a doctor or becoming an engineer, but it was like this new vision of a state, this vision of dignity, this vision of self-determination. And I think it was I think fundamental, and I don't speak for myself, I speak for an entire generation that grew up in that time, and which I believe would have been radicalized like that. And I also think that and I'm not making this up or saying this because it's an interview, that for Indian Tamils it was always it was two things, right? On the one hand, it's this idea that we also have a history of fighting for our language, understanding that our people were willing to die for our language, and so it was an easy relation to make. But I think on the other side, it was also this idea of complicity, a complicity that you did not participate in, but because of the decisions of the Indian state, which I think were flawed, Indian foreign policy, which Tamil Nadu cannot control or could not control or could not. So I think it really weighed heavily down upon us. So if the IPKF went and increasingly, I think the general opinion in India is that what they did was in no way justifiable, that nothing could justify rapes or occupation or the kind of mindless violence that they visited when they went as a peacekeeping force. So I think that beginning in like the late 80s until the genocide that went on in 2009, I think that we felt a mixture of helplessness. We also felt a mixture of like, isn't there anything that we could do? So I genuinely believe that the struggle that happened there is an integral part of how I look at the world.
You're a poet also and a translator, having translated the Kamathapal from the Tirukkural in the Book of Desire, as well as poems of the female cadres, which can be seen at the end of The Orders Were to Rape You. Where are the differences in each of these versions of you?
No, I think I'm the same person. I'm the same person, or I would like to believe that. Sometimes you enter into these projects because nobody has gone there. Like, I don't know how, but it's like, and it's a very interesting juxtaposition that you brought about, you're talking about the female tigers who are writing poems. So, they were very political, they were on the ground, willing to give up their lives, and they were also writing poetry, which was very political. And we're talking about the Kamathupal, which is like, from the Tirukural, 2000 years old text. And there's something that, you go and you read and you understand. Even the opening chapter of the, the third book of the Tirukural, which is the Kamathupal or Inbathupal. And this man says, Pandariyen Kutren Badanai Ini Arindhen Pendagayal Peramarkattu. So he says, I did not know what is death in those times, but now I know it strikes with a woman's, death is in a woman's striking eyes. And I think there's another reference where like she has descended with a terrifying army of she-devils, So the women as a fighter, or the woman as somebody who strikes death into you, I don't find much of a difference between the object of desire in the Tirukural and the woman who is a soldier on the ground and a combatant. I think they exist. And the idea that, the Tamil woman could be that intimidating and the words are exactly what striking death, bearing arms or, being that insanely desirable. I think we have a continuity of tradition and we have a continuity of celebration of the women. But what I always felt was that when these women exist, when they exist as fighters on the ground, let's say in this 20th century, and we have in 2000 years ago, we also have these, these women who are like the greatest people who talk about their desire and are also desired. Why is it that we do not have women who philosophize about it? Why don't we have a female philosopher who talks about what is love in the Tamil universe, what is desire in the Tamil universe? So why have we left the job of commentary to other people, especially to men, and not just Tamil men, white scholars and others. And so for me, the idea is that, why has no Tamil woman, why is she just somebody who's getting discussed by other people? Why is she not discussing herself? I do not see a rupture. I do not see a rupture in the different parts of myself because I do not see a rupture in the tradition. They are different manifestations, and I think that's how I like to look at my practice as well, as different manifestations of the same urge to express and to be creative, I think.
Does the artist have a responsibility to be political?
I would think so. It's a very big question. I think part of it is also the fact that we have been talking about this for since the beginning of art, but we are now at a historical moment where the far right is funding propaganda films, and it's happened with Hitler, it's happened with Mussolini, it's happening with the fascist far right across the world, and I think that when even if you're not doing art for the sake of politics, at least you have to look at the right wing and where's our counter? What are we doing? Why are we allowing everyone to get brainwashed by this propaganda? So what do we do against it? So it's no longer a question of should it be, could it be, is that a safe thing? I really think we have been pushed into a corner where we have no other go except being political.
And finally, could you name 5 works of art that across any medium
yes.
that has inspired you?
Yeah. No, this was possibly the only cheat sheet because I was asked asked to think of 5 things that and it's good I was asked to think when I was writing this book. So yeah, I think a big influence was obviously MIA's Bad Girls, Live Fast Die Young, Bad Girls Do It Well. So it was I think it was possibly the soundtrack to writing the book. So that's the music part of it. I think in terms of actual art, a lot of, I don't know if you call it art, but I think a lot of online memes also helps me orient myself towards this because they are the meme culture is very strong, and the meme culture of shaming is also very strong. So I wouldn't call them art, but they are still pathetic effects sometimes to shame people, especially this whole Bernal Lagao, because you're and it's a very it's a very far right meme, but I thought that, the meme culture of the internet, and especially I think Tamils have a very good meme game, like with Vadivelu jokes or like, and they're like the meme kings of the universe. So I think memes really played like heavily into this book. In terms of other writing that, took me here, it was definitely a lot of poetry. I can't, pinpoint one or the other, but I think there was a lot of poetry that I was reading because I had just finished my own collection of poems. So there was this idea that, we have to write about it. But I also think this, I wouldn't isolate. But I think if I had to talk about poetry, it was poetry that and the sloganeering that happened out of the CAA NRC protest that was so big in Delhi. So if you see this novel, she's a character who's like going and fighting against the water cannons of the police. But Indian campuses were so alive with protest and protest chants, and I think this most important chant that was popularized by someone who is now a Congress politician, Kanhaiya Kumar, was Azadi. This entire chants asking for Brahmanwad se Azadi, and like things of like Azadi meaning freedom, but it became a very popular chant. So I think that chant is like important for the book. So I've told you the music, I've told you the memes, I've told you the chants, and then I think this book was also like possibly the only time I would show away, I don't know, some bougie aspirationalist thing is that I like fashion. I cannot afford it, but I like to look at it. Oh yeah, I can afford it from London thrift stores. So this is the first time I was actually looking at, or writing with my characters visibly wearing, branded items, or like, their dressing sense or their lipstick shades and every single thing. So I cannot reduce it to one specific thing. So like right from the Marc Jacobs sunglasses that Amy's wearing to the... And sometimes like Abercrombie & Fitch, for instance, is a company that's been associated with the right, but they make good jeans, like, so it was all of these controversial things. So definitely fashion or fast fashion or, whatever it is, highbrow fashion, designer labels, these were almost like a language that I could not ignore, because it has become, especially in the age of Instagram, how we self-curate ourselves, but also how we present ourselves. And I thought that, fashion is just very, very there, and and it was, I almost felt guilty writing about it, like absolutely guilty writing about it. So that's 4. And
any fiction?
No, I don't read any fiction. Actually, that's the worst thing. I don't read anybody else's fiction when I'm writing, because I'm so scared. I mean, I've done 4 novels. But I think that if I read someone, I'm going to sound like them, and I'm like, it's almost like preserving that my voice or what I'm trying to get in this book, because it takes me at least 6 months to a year to say, oh, this is how this person is going to sound like, this is how the book is going to sound like. And I'm like, what if I steal without their knowledge? What if I steal without my own knowledge? Like, what if I sound like them, or what if this voice goes away? So it's like I think 99% of my life there's no discipline, but when it comes to my writing, I'm like this absolute control freak. So that's one thing. But I think the other art, it's not a work of art, but the art form there is possibly smoking. I don't know if it was the character, for her a smoke is almost like having a smoke is almost a way of life, and I think it would be very difficult to argue it's an art form, but I think she saw cigarettes as an extension of self-expression. So please, cigarette smoking is injurious to health. Tobacco cuts short lives. Please put all the trigger warnings. Not to encourage anybody to smoke, but
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Meena.
much. That's lovely.